Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Kerry Magro, a professional speaker, author, and autism self advocate. I am really excited to be here today. Today is Giving Tuesday, an annual day of giving, and I'm here with my wonderful mom. Who, without her and the support of my dad and my family, would not be where I am today as a speaker and as somebody who's living independently as well. So, Mom, thank you so much for joining me today on Giving Tuesday.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be here on Giving Tuesday. I mean, there are a lot of nonprofits out there today that depend on the generosity of the people in the public to give back to the communities, and it's just a wonderful day to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Mom, tell us a little bit about you. Obviously, people who follow me on my Facebook page know a little bit about my journey already. I mentioned you a lot, but tell us a little bit about what you do, and we'll go from there.
So, I am a full-time professional planner. I work for urban government in New Jersey, and work for a wonderful mayor who's just the best at helping people. And I do a lot of different things. I do a lot of planning board work. I do a lot of grant work. I'm building a park right now, and I'm just very excited about my job. So.
Nice, nice. So, Mom, tell us a little bit about what went into that initial autism diagnosis when I was 4. Obviously, it took 18 months. Tell everyone a little bit about what were some of the early signs and what went about going about that diagnosis.
Well, I think it was even probably before 18 months. So, when you were very small, I've always worked. And so I had maternity leave, and then I went back to work, and you went into daycare. Went to a very nice daycare, and everything was going along fine until it wasn't. It was something had scared you at the daycare center. We believe it was the firemen. It was October, and the firemen came in to do a presentation with your little 2-year old class, and for some reason you got very upset by it. I think it was the bells or the noise, and they had a very hard time calming you down. And I think you were afraid to go back into the room because you thought that the noise would come again. And they were wonderful people there, very trained in dealing with little children, and it just did not get better. And they recommended that we have you examined and tested, and we did. We took you to someone in Hoboken, New Jersey, a child psychologist type of person, and didn't really have a clue as to what was going on. And then you just continued to trial and error. We tried to deal with the coping of the daycare and the problems that we're having there. And then finally, we were we were directed to go to Hackensack Institute for Child Development, and we were put on a list there, and finally got you in there to be tested. And the testing process was not very different than it is now. Testing process can take up to 6 months. The doctors and the interdiscipline team, different people on the team see the child, and they go back like every week or every month, and so it does take a very long time. And in your case, you did not really get a diagnosis. They call it team staffing, where everybody on the team gets together and they write a piece of the evaluation. And the team staffing came out. It must have been 24 pages, and the front page had all your diagnostic codes, and then it's in back of it is about 20 pages of individual reports from the different professionals on what testing they had done and what they saw. So that was it. We got this very lengthy report, and took it to your pediatrician in New York, your wonderful pediatrician, Dr. Barney Softness, who saw you like from the minute you were born, basically. So he had known you a while, and he basically said it was a very detailed report. Whose kid was it? Because he just didn't know if that really represented what was going on with you. And so his solution to that was to get a second opinion, and he just happened to know the director of child psychiatry at Cornell, who when we look back on it, you would have never gotten an appointment to see the director of psychiatry at Cornell. But because Dr. Softness interned with Dr. Hertzik, you were able to get an appointment pretty quickly. And you saw her for 2 visits instead of like the 9, 10, 12 months of, of visits up to Hackensack and all the stuff that went around that. You saw Dr. Hertzik twice. And she confirmed the diagnosis, the overall diagnosis, which was pervasive development disorder, not a voice specified. But her attitude towards it, or her approach to it, was much different than Hackensack's, in that she just said, this is a diagnosis, and now we have to find Kerry an appropriate therapeutic nursery school. So it was more, she took it in stride, and she wasn't panicked as we were, because you get a 26-page diagnosis thing, you don't really have anybody to talk to about it, because Hackensack was very good at with their diagnostic process, but you never saw them again after that. It was just, they did the diagnosis that took a very long time, and then they just sent you on your way. So you then had Dr. Hertzik.
So, yeah, and thank you so much for explaining that for everyone at home. I just wanted to give a few shout outs really quickly. So just so you guys know, I would love if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comments. We'll try to get to as many questions during our Facebook Live as possible. Again, my name is Kerry Magro, and today is Giving Tuesday, an annual day of giving. If you would like to support our scholarship program, our nonprofit that's given out 130 scholarships for autistic students to go to college, has provided 15 small business grants for small businesses to hire people with disabilities, along with so many other initiatives that we have going on. I'm going to leave a link in the comments. You could also see on the ticker right here, kfmmakeadifference.org/donate. Any little bit helps, especially during this holiday season. So, I guess you were a big inspiration for me, obviously, growing up, but also for the nonprofit. And I talked to you a little bit about the nonprofit and why I wanted to do what I did with the nonprofit. Can you explain a little bit about how you got involved to help me out, and what was behind the idea of KFM Making a Difference?
Well, KFM was behind behind the nonprofit. I mean, that those are your initials, Kerry Francis Magro. But I think it was your idea to set up the nonprofit. But with my background as a planner, what I do is I fill out forms. I research what goes into applying for things, and applying for a nonprofit status is a process in and of itself. It's a complicated process. You have to apply to the IRS in order to do it. And we were very lucky that we had a very good friend and mentor to you, Bill O'Day, who actually helped us put together the paperwork. And then, of course, we had a couple of lawyers that actually finalized the documents. But getting that nonprofit status, which makes you a 501(c), which makes the donations to your nonprofit tax exempt, is a process. And there are many nonprofits, all of whom are soliciting money today that is tax deductible for their various charities. And a 501(c) is classified as a charity. So it's a nonprofit charity for tax purposes. And took you about a year, I believe, to actually fill out the paperwork and get it. They go back and forth, they ask you questions, and then you finally got your status as a nonprofit, and you've been able to do quite a bit with it. I was thinking today about, I was looking at some of the posts that you had, and I was looking, as much as I love the school stuff and the college stuff, I was looking at the small businesses that employ people on the spectrum, and that's a smaller part of your nonprofit, but I think it's a very, very important thing that you give back, and you encourage people to hire people with disabilities, which is a big problem. We both know how many people with disabilities age out at 21 from the educational system, or if they're lucky enough, like you, to have a college situation to fall back on. But there are so many people that have a disability and don't get employed. So I think it's very important as you talk about your nonprofit to not only focus on the students, which you've been able to help, which has been pretty inspirational. That's what you write your books about. But I think it's also very important to see this this thing that you tell me all the time, that this 500,000 uh, for 500,000.
700,000. Yep.
700,000. So what is the end? You can answer the end of that quote about uh,
So,
you have to be.
so currently, right now, there are going to be 700,000 autistic children who will reach autistic adulthood within the next decade, and we need to be ready for them. So a lot of supports just fall off completely.
Right.
So we have a few questions coming in. Thank you all so much. Again, feel free to write any question that you have. And this question comes in from Katie. Katie, how are you this evening or afternoon, depending where you are? Katie writes, did you have emotional meltdowns at young ages where you got really fixated on things and just can't regulate? If so, how did mom handle those times? So mom, that was initially what some of my biggest challenges growing up.
Yeah. So emotional meltdowns. We live in Jersey City, New Jersey, which is an urban area, and many of the houses have gates on them. And one of your best emotional meltdown that I remember is that you would open the door and you would kick the door and you would scream at the door and you would hit your head on the door. And at that point in time, we were just trying to get you not to have, not to get not to be bleeding and have stitches, which thankfully you didn't have. But there were definitely there were tantrums. I don't think any mother of an autistic child. In fact, I'm amazed at how the scenario is still the same. Time may go on, but the crying that can't stop. You can't regulate yourself. You get upset about something, and it's just no attempt at comforting can really soothe the child when they're in a tantrum. They just have to cry it out and scream it out and kick it out. And, the parent tries to be reassuring and tries to make sure that the child doesn't hurt him or herself, which is, really very important.
Yeah, I would have to say one of the biggest comments we get on our Facebook page is the differences between tantrums and meltdowns. And I think it's so important that people remember that you can't stop a meltdown. You just, like my mom was just saying, you have to let it do its course. So I think that's really, really important to mention. So ironically enough, I have a comment that came in from a fellow Alpha Phi Omega. I went to a service fraternity in college, and Lillian writes, I forwarded information about our nonprofit, KFM Make a Difference, to a streaming charity group of which I'm a member. My hope is that we can help fundraise to help your mission, Lillian. I appreciate that so much, and I hope you and Finn are doing well. I've also forwarded your info to one of the employee resource groups here in the hopes that you can come here speak someday. Thank you, Lillian. That means a lot. Honestly, I would say more in the past 2 years, I've gotten the wonderful opportunity to provide professional development for companies as part of Lunch and Learns. Next month, I'll be speaking with Alcoa, which is an aluminum company in Pennsylvania, as part of a Lunch and Learn. And this year, we also spoke with Citrix. We spoke with many different big companies, but also small companies as well, on the ROI benefits of hiring not only people with autism, but neurodiverse needs in the workplace. So I really, really appreciate that comment. Again, for people who are just joining us, my name is Carrie Magro, professional speaker and autism self-advocate. I'm here with my wonderful mom, who's answering questions about my autism journey in the hopes that we might be able to help a few parents who might be joining us for this Facebook Live today. This is a great question. And I get this question a lot. This is probably the second most frequent question I receive. And the question comes from Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Lisa writes, my child is newly diagnosed. Can you talk about how you started speaking? Mom, so I started saying my first few words when I was 2.5. It took till I was 7 to speak in complete sentences. What was that? The first word I ever said was juice. I know that, but what was some of the just experience that came with that?
Yeah, so it was interesting because you babbled, you had sounds, and some children with autism don't have sounds, and so they basically are mute. But you did have sounds, and you would giggle, you would cry. So we didn't think that when we questioned the fact that you really weren't speaking appropriately for your age, we basically got the same thing that many parents get. Oh, he's an only child. He's not around other little children, so he doesn't really know to speak. And that all sounded good, and that's reassuring for a while. But then you realize they're really, other children are speaking, and that there is a developmental delay of some sort. So um, I journaled. I wrote everything down, and so I wrote down parts of words you said. I just kept track. I would write in the back of this little journal book, whenever you made a sound, and whenever you started to say a word. But we, like other parents, try repetition. We would say something to you and try to get you to repeat it. That seemed to really, be helpful. I have a crazy, one of those like rear view mirror things, but I bought Hooked on Phonics. And I actually tried to use Hooked on Phonics as a way to, they have little stickers in them, and you liked rewards. And so I bought Hooked on Phonics and actually took you up to our house in Vermont, and we would do one page, only one page a day. We didn't overwhelm it, but we would go through that page, and we would try to get you to repeat the sounds that were the same way you learned to read on Hooked on Phonics. But at that point, you weren't old enough to read. But we basically used it more as a speech tool, as a trainer for speech. And it was interesting because you didn't speak for so very long, and then once you started to speak, it was like a dam had broken, and like there were a lot of words. I know people say, "Oh, well, he started speaking, he's never stopped. He's never shut up after that." But looking back at these crazy books that I used to keep at the time, not knowing what they meant or if they had any meaning at all, I do see, that you didn't speak for a long time. Then there were the partial words, and then there'd be a day or a month where there were 10 words, which was at that point that was phenomenal, and things like that. So speech comes at this point. People are much more schooled in how to have early intervention, and try to define actually what the root is at the root of the lack of speech or the delayed speech. I know there's a lot of early intervention in different states where below 3, you can have somebody come to your home and evaluate the child and work with them. And then after 3, it basically falls more on the school systems, because then you're covered by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which covers children from 3 to 21. And that's really, I think, where the speech therapists come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that. And just for people at home, one of the things that I really harp on is the importance that the goal is not speech, it's communication. We really need to grasp assistive technology, text to speech devices as well, and remember that the main goal is communication, not speech. So, for people at home, again, Katie, Lisa, and everyone who's joining us this evening, if you have found any of these answers helpful for your own specific journey, we would love if you would consider giving back to our cause. Again, my nonprofit is a 501c3 called KFM Making a Difference. We provide 130 scholarships for autistic students to go to college and provide 15 small business grants. We also host sensory inclusive events. I will be dressing up as Santa Claus for the 9th year in a row for an autism and sensory friendly Santa event that we do in New Jersey every year. We actually have a few slots open. If there are anyone from New Jersey or want to join us virtually interested, let us know in the comments and we'll get that information information to you. I did notice somebody mentioning that they do not have funds to support us for Giving Tuesday, and that's perfectly okay. Ironically enough, we have had 11 people so far create Facebook fundraisers, which are absolutely free to do. You can go to the link in the comments, but also people who just are sharing about our mission with their friends via starting a Facebook fundraiser and then inviting others to raise money to support the cause. So if you're low on funds, we totally understand. And if you want to have a creative way of giving back, you can create a free Facebook fundraiser via the comments section to support our cause and our many initiatives. So we had another great question come in. Oh, well, Dana writes, can't wait until the Santa event. Dana, we are excited to see you. This question came in from Chelsea on LinkedIn. Hey, Chelsea. Chelsea writes, my son is 4 years old and is autistic. I often catch myself talking to my spouse like he's not in the room because of his limited speech. Do you recall this happening when you were younger? How can I better communicate to my son? I do remember little bits and pieces of that, but it was always, and I'm an only child. It always seemed to me that when those situations happened, they weren't for too long. And when I was in the room, my parents just focused on trying to keep the language as appropriate and as novice to me as my development had been at that time, especially when I was just starting to say my first few words for the first time. Mom, do you have memories of this at all?
Yeah, I think Chelsea has a really good question and thought, because I, I think all parents talk about their children as if they're not in the room. I think we don't really realize at what level our children understand us, what we're talking about. So, you can just be. We used to do a lot of driving, and like we would be in the car talking about family issues or our relatives and things like that. And sometimes you would do that without really any thought to the fact that, hey, my child may really know what we're talking about. So I think it's something we all do as parents. We talk we when we're especially when we're with our significant other or spouse. I think we carry on conversations, as if the child isn't there, and probably the child does understand much more than we should give thought to. So I think it's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another great question that came in from Dorian. It's a little long, so won't put it on the actual screen. But Dorian writes, I have a 4-year-old son who just got diagnosed when he was 3. He has a genetic default that causes autism and epilepsy. Only 9 other known cases in the world. Among these, he is the only one that's verbal and still progressing. As he is the only one of a small group, I really have to keep fighting constantly for his rights. Did your mom have the idea she had to fight for you? I mean, you could take this in many ways, but I'll go ahead.
No, I'm glad I'm glad that she's fighting for her child. That's the person. That's the most wonderful gift you can give to anybody. Um, I was working full time, and I was very as much as I knew about things, I did not know anything about school systems, and I did not know much about children with disabilities. And So I went to my Board of Education meeting, found out that I knew half of the Board of Ed, which I would have never known that I did, because I would have never gone to a Board of Ed meeting. And I wound up running for the Board of Education in Kerry's hometown. I won by one vote, and I stayed on the board for 20 years. So I learned a lot about fighting, not only for my son, but for an entire population of special ed students, who, like everything else, the people in my town now had a parent who had a child in special ed, and a child who had autism, and a parent who was willing to fight to get my son his rights. And I was lucky enough to help bring a lot of those parents along to help them fight for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a great question that came in from Marcus. Hey, Marcus. Marcus writes, how do you introduce friendships and make them last? My son has never really had solid friendships as he sees most children as tools for his needs. Uh, so, Marcus, I think one of the biggest things for me was finding common interest. I mean, some of my best, and it's going to sound very novice, and this is just stuff that would work for anyone. But really latching it on and finding my true interest at an early age really helped me figure out who I want to be friends with in the future. I think it's also important to help your son understand the benefits of a friendship because, for example, I was bullied growing up. So I would befriend bullies because even though there was negative attention, it was some form of attention. So I think it's really, really important that we discuss that, but also continuing to build on social skills when you can too. Mom, was there anything else you wanted to add on that?
Well, I'm not sure how many friends you really had for many, many years, but um, I signed you up for everything. I mean, anything that had a kid at it. Like we were talking today with a good friend of ours who, Kerry started bowling when he was 4 years old. That's when you do pee wee bowling. We found a pee wee bowling league at a local bowling alley. We signed him up, and you went there every Saturday, and you threw the ball and then ran back and sat, never talked to any of the kids at all that you were bowling with. And then the last week of the year, which was May, it's like somebody blew a tissue at you and you blew it back. So it took you a year sitting on a bench, getting up, but you were there and you were around children. And, the next year it was totally different situation. Anthony and Artie became, your good buddies at bowling, and, you remain friends with them today. So, but we went from bowling to t-ball to bitty basketball. And in many cases, it was just like tutoring. It was people teaching you how to do the sports, but it gave you an opportunity to be around little kids and young kids. And I think that helped you immensely because you didn't have friends. So, you weren't going to go to school and have a conversation and bring somebody home, which is what, people wished, and you weren't getting invited to birthday parties and things like that. So we just forced a situation where you were going to be around children, and eventually it clicked.
Yeah. Uh, so there's another great question that came in from Rama. And just for people joining us, again, my name is Carrie Magro. I'm here with my mom, Sue, discussing my autism journey. The title is 30 Years of Autism, a Mother and Son Perspective. I was diagnosed with autism just a little over 30 years ago. So this is also Giving Tuesday, an annual day of giving. We would love if any of the answers that we're sharing with you tonight have been helpful. In the comments, I've left a link to kfmmakingadifference.org, our nonprofit organization, which does some really cool initiatives to support the autism disability community. We would love your support today and for the holiday season. So Rama writes, hi, my 6-year-old has limited verbal and receptive language. How can I encourage him to communicate more? He's more requester stage with 1 or 2 words only around food. Yeah, Rama, one of the biggest things is I definitely recommend peer-to-peer interaction as much as possible. Being able to have communication on the same levels as others, even if it's just noise, can be really beneficial to actually lead to future communication potentially when it comes to words. So, especially if your child has siblings who are around the same age, just continuing to encourage that peer-to-peer interaction, because hopefully ultimately that will lead to more also self-motivation to want to continue communicating in that way. Mom, was there anything that helped me?
Um, well, this may be, I don't know, again, it's hindsight, but um, you're a type of person who responds to rewards, and we've rewarded you for everything. I mean, any positive thing that happened during a day that that we could encourage you by, you had more stickers than the heavens. I mean, we just, we had sticker books, and if you got 5 stickers, then you get a different sticker, you get a bigger sticker. And so we just set up these crazy reward systems to encourage you, that if you did something, I guess it was more motivational, that if you did something, to try to do it again, or try to do it, try to go to the next level. And the next level in these cases was, we're not talking about writing a book. We're talking about if you can say a sound, try to get the child to say 2 sounds and 3 sounds, and let them know that they can be rewarded for positive activities. So that helped you a great deal.
So we have another great question from Kelly. Hey, Kelly. Kelly writes, my almost 4-year-old daughter is waiting for an
I did
evaluation.
not. Mhm.
She has some deficits with inattentiveness, communication delays, and has ecophilia and distal language, but she's also hyperlexic, loves planets, and very musical. How do I fill the gap between the immaturity in some areas, but continue to foster her growth in the other areas? No, Kelly, that's a question I won't have necessarily the best response to. But honestly, when it comes to immaturity, I think having strong, positive peer role models who, in their own right, have strong maturity can be really, really beneficial. And even for a 4-year-old child, I believe peer mentoring should start as early as 5 years old. A 5-year-old just mentoring a 4-year-old, especially somebody who has that communication level, who is a leader. More often than not, a peer mentor is going to have strong leadership abilities, even somebody who's very, very young. And it's also going to have a level of maturity to them as well. That will hopefully lead to not only having somebody to connect with from the social aspect, but also having somebody that your daughter can look up to. That's something I continue to advocate for, especially for those who might have a little bit of immaturity in them. What were your thoughts?
That's a tough one. I mean, she has a lot going on in a lot of different areas. I mean, it took me a very long time to find the definition of pervasive, because you have pervasive development disorder. And I don't know, as we went through it, I actually learned what that really means. And what it means is that it means you don't have any like crisis. You don't have a deficit in any one area, but you have a little bit of a deficit in so many areas that they define it as pervasive, because when you add them all up, it impacts your speech or your language or your communication. So I think in this child's situation, this child, I would look and say that, and they may not have pervasive development disorder, but I think that, the diagnoses create a situation of pervasiveness where you have a little bit in each area. And it's hard with that, because if you're going to work on one thing and you put all your effort into that one thing to make it better, but then you still have other things to work on. So it really takes time and patience, and trying to figure out what works, and so that you're not constantly trying to improve, and then at the expense of all of those other things that are just a little bit off also, that need attention. I think the mother gave a really great overview and list, and maybe that's where she starts, with a list of the different areas that her child has diagnosed, and start to look at it more globally, and say, oh well, what can I do in this area or that area? Because it's hard work. It's hard work raising children with disabilities.
Yeah, yeah. So we have a lot of people sharing where they're from, and that's awesome. We have people joining us from London. Marcus is joining us from London. Christina from Maryland. Jen from Vancouver, Canada, Elle from
Oh,
Sydney, Australia, where we love, by the way. I can't wait to go back and visit. In addition to Tatiana from Costa Rica. So thank you all so much for sharing where you're joining us from tonight. We had a
let me just jump in and say that's important because aside from Costa Rica, you've been to every one of those areas and you've presented, maybe more than once in those areas. So it's good to know. Just got back from London. Been to Maryland many times and been to Vancouver. I'm talking about you being at these places. So it's good to let people know that you really do speak all over the world and keep in touch with you so that if you're in an area, because I've seen you do that. I've seen you have a speech or a conference, and then you'll set up a little meet and greet with people from the area that you've met online or something, or people will come out to see you from that you've met online. So that would be good to get in touch with, keep in touch with people.
Yeah, we just spoke in London about education, special education primarily, and we've been a little bit all over the place. We've been in Australia. We spoke in Perth to an autism nonprofit down there. So if you know of any groups that would like me to speak, please feel free to write them in the comments, and I will message you with more information on how we might be able to work together. Uh, Mom, I love you to death. My mom is also just the biggest motivator and just really wants me to succeed. I have a full-time job in public speaking, and I just love that you gave me a plug as well. Dana writes, hey, Dana, sorry I missed your question earlier. So my son is, or my daughter is nonverbal. I tried using an iPad with her, but she loves to chew on everything, and we've had minimal success with the iPad. How else should we be encouraging communication? Dana, especially in terms of trying to figure out what type of learner she is. I've seen a lot of kinetic learners who like to move around a lot to learn in that way. Have really had success with things like American Sign Language. Again, this is a spectrum. So if you met one, you met one. It's not going to necessarily be what it is for everyone. In addition to that, lower forms of assistive technology, just picture exchange communication systems that are not necessarily via an iPad, might be via a chart that you have specifically in your household as well, where they can bring that along with them and they can point at certain things to communicate in that way. Those are two of the ones I see a lot. When I was a kid, I would point at everything, especially towards some of my basic needs. Mom, was there anything you want to add on that?
No. But I've had a thought pretty much since we started this, and maybe it's just a perspective or retrospective. But I'd like to say to every parent or every caregiver that's on this, the issues that they are bringing up and questions they're asking today, and where their child is today, is where you were 30 years ago. And all I could say to them is look at you now, because this is what hard work and of parenting can achieve. You were you were not an easy case. You were not an easy child, and it did not turn around for many years. But it can turn around. So thank you, all the parents that are out there supporting their little kids right now. I have a lot of hope for all of you.
Yeah. Anita writes, hey, Anita. Anita asks, I really love what you're doing. You're adding about peer-to-peer exposure. I have friends that don't want their autistic kids in a typical environment. How would you advise parents to convince their school system to have more integrated, inclusive classrooms? Anita, Special Olympics has a thing called the Champion Program, which really focuses on inclusivity. They have about 100 schools that now have this program. I definitely recommend talking to, if your school district has a special education parent advisory council, a strong parent to teacher advisory group. These are just great ways of getting a village together to really advocate from a local level to encourage your school district to get more involved, especially if there are town halls specifically in those school districts, telling them about the importance of inclusion overall. In addition to that, having speakers come in. I mean, I do speak through professional development, but I also speak as part of school assemblies to students on the importance of autism, inclusion, diversity, kindness, bullying prevention as well. In addition to speaking to educators as part of staff development during the summer months and during winter break about teaching the way that our students learn. So if you have a school that you might be interested in me speaking to, write it in the comments, and I can definitely send all of you more information on how I can contact your school about speaking. Mom,
Carrie, I'd like to stay on that one for a second though, because I think
sure.
part of what the parent may be asking is that I think the parents should check with the school to see if the groups are called CPACs, Special Ed Parents Advisory Councils. Many schools and many states support parents in the schools. I know some states have SPAN, which is Special Parents Advocacy Network, which is more a professional group that helps with the children. Or helps with the IEP process. But I would start out in any school district, any district that my child was attending, by asking what they do. Do they have a special ed parents advisory council? Sometimes in some towns it's special ed moms on Facebook groups that have them. But I think it's very important to have that village and to have that support from other parents of children that are like their kids or our kids. So I think that's how I would start. And if you have to call the special ed department in your school to find out, if there is one, they would know.
Yep. Yep. Again, everyone who's joining us, if you found any of these answers helpful tonight, today is Giving Tuesday, an annual day of giving. I've included information on how you could support our mission, our nonprofit KFM Making a Difference, in the comments. In addition, this little ticker right here, kfmmakingadifference.org/donate. If you're low on funds and still want to support, you could create a free Facebook fundraiser to support our mission, and that information is also in the comments as well. Christina writes, hey, Christina, Carrie's mom, how did you deal with social interactions? My son desires to have friends, but when he gets around kids who try to engage him and he's very familiar with, he reverts back to parallel play. Did you force connections, or did you just leave it alone?
I forced connections. So we had what we call the 3-strike rule. So I would basically tell Kerry that he had to do something 3 times, and then if he couldn't do it after the 3rd time, then I would let it alone. So I mean, so as I said, I had a very sports orientated approach to all this stuff. I mean, I just signed him up for everything. I signed him up for baseball, not football, but I signed him up for things, and he would basically not want to do anything. And I would say, well, you have to do this. And, then if he didn't do it after the 3rd time, I would leave it alone, because at some point, you just have to let them, you can't force them to have friends. But as I said, with the example of the bowling, sat on that bench, went every week, got up, threw the ball. Pee-wee bowling, you always hit something. That's the way it's structured. And then would go sit back down. But 50 weeks in, that's when it clicked, and he decided that he wanted to interact with the other children. And then from that time on, he did, at least in the bowling. Now something else was something else, but so I would say you have to start. I would encourage you starting the child, whether the child wants to do it or not. And then you have to work with them and see where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to give a shout out really quickly. Anita, thank you so much. Anita writes, Carrie, I'm going to be donating to your nonprofit. We actually have our nonprofit we started for kids in our areas. That's awesome, Anita. And once we get really going, I'd love to have you come speak. Anita, that means the world to me. And for those who have already donated, who have joined us today, I really appreciate it. We need your support now more than ever. Especially with the current climate of nonprofits, inflation being what it is, even the smallest amount can definitely help us as we continue to spearhead the many initiatives that we have going on. So, Anita, thank you for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that also. I mean, because it's hard for people to understand how nonprofits operate, but in many cases, the money that if people are able to donate to you, you wind up doing pro bono work for groups of parents that will call you and like really, really ask you to come and just say, we don't have $1, we don't have $100, and I mean so you wind up paying your travel costs, you wind up paying your hotel costs, and doing pro bono work because you want to give back to the community, and it's the generosity of people like giving on Giving Tuesday that allow that to happen.
Yeah. We'll take one more question. And again, for those who have any follow-up questions, feel free to write them in the comments and I'll try to get back to you. So this final question comes in, and also just to give a shout out to Jonathan. Jonathan, I believe is a self-advocate, but Jonathan writes, Carrie, I've been a student for 30 years in a special education program. And he went to a group called the Karen Honey Clinic to PS 30. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here. So the final question before we wrap up tonight is just from Casey. Hi, Casey. Casey writes, my son is in full-time ABA therapy. Public school just isn't for him. Is that okay? And Casey, I'll just tell you right away, applied behavioral analysis is not necessarily the best therapy for everybody. Again, it's a very wide spectrum. The 5 therapies that helped me tremendously were occupational, physical, speech, music, and theater therapy. Try to find what works best for your child. I will also say about the school systems that it's very hit and miss. It really depends what local area you're in. I would definitely talk to your child's study team when you are entering the school to see what their previous history is of working with special needs students in addition to autistic students, to see if they have a previous history and what they did to support those students. I would also talk to the Special Education Parent Advisory Council or PTA as you're starting that new school to see what their experiences are too. Mom, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I had a question back to Casey. I mean, they say that they're in full-time ABA therapy. Are they under 5? Because, once the child becomes first grade, they have to go to school. And I know people who have kept their child home, and I've known people who, have just decided to do alternate therapies and not send their child to school at all, which is fine as long as they're on a pre-K level. But, as you get older, the school systems require you have some sort of supervision from school systems. So is the child younger than, are they in preschool?
So while that's going on, Casey, if you want to write your response in the comments, and while Casey is doing that, Liliana writes, did you tell Carrie since he was little that he was on the spectrum? I have not said that to my son yet. I don't know what to say. Liliana, I did a webinar on helpful tips to talk to your child about their diagnosis. My parents told me about my autism diagnosis when I was 11 and a half. And it wasn't life-changing at the start, but years later, I was sitting on my IEP meetings. They simply said, Carrie, you have something called pervasive developmental disorder. Now that was specified, it's a form of autism. It means you learn differently, but it doesn't make you any less of a person. And then I went to go watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Casey writes, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think I think it depends also on what the child is. I mean, you found out when you were 11, you came home and asked us when you were 11 and a half, but by that time you were going to a school where all students were special ed students. So you went from the public school system to the private special ed school system. So I think you were in a little bit of a different situation, but most of what I find, I was on a board of ed for 20 years. Really, the younger you tell the child, the better, but the more nonchalant you get about it. Just, well, like, I have brown eyes and my sister has blue eyes. It's, you just make it very nonchalant and not a big deal. And I think that's the way, and the way that it becomes much easier. I think I have gone through situations where I've seen brilliant kids not be told until they were 16 or 17 and have total meltdowns at 16 and 17 and can't deal with it at all. So I think there is an appropriate time to tell the child, and I think it's before 11 and a half. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, Mom, Casey wrote back and said that her son is 7 on this question
oh,
about
okay.
public school.
Right. So, again, if the ABA therapy is being done within a school setting, maybe it's a special school that has or a charter school that has the ABA as its core. Most of the people I know who go to ABA, they go to ABA to develop speech, and then once they have speech, they move into the public school system. So, and again, you probably already know this, but we answer questions from people all the time, and Carrie has multiple ways to be reached out to, and it sounds like we start dialogues with parents to delve into these questions a little bit deeper in order to be more efficient in our answers.
Absolutely. So, thank you all so much for joining us on Giving Tuesday, an annual day of giving. I would like to thank my wonderful mom for taking a little time out of her busy schedule to answer questions from her autism community as well. Again, my name is Carrie Magro, professional speaker and autism self advocate, and we'll hopefully have another one of these very, very soon. But for now, have a happy holiday season. And Mom, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just, I know we do this from time to time, but I'd be interested in the chat box if people think that they'd like to see us do it more often.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great night, Al.